Are you an American? Are you a Christian? Is it permissible to identify as both without creating conflict? What about the separation of church and state? Is your citizenship in the USA, or is it in heaven, or can it be both? If you are a Christian and your country heads down a decidedly anti-Christian path, where should your allegiance be? Today on Craving Answers, Craving God, let's tackle the question, what should Christians' attitudes about their country be? I'm Chuck Rathert with Aaron Miller. Aaron is the pastor at St. James Lutheran Church in Glen Carbon, Illinois. Aaron, it has been said, avoid discussions of religion and politics. The apparent reason is the discord that those topics often seem to produce. So, you and I, are we about to enter a contentious realm?
It won't be contentious that we talk about religion if we stick to what our culture calls religion. Our culture thinks of religion as, private, personal beliefs, opinions about, closely held personal topics, or psychologically beneficial, spiritual exercises which focus on the individual's belief in God. As long as we stick to those things, nobody minds if we talk about religion. But what will be contentious is if we have a discussion about religion that implies that it has something to say to politics. If we talk about religion in a way that seems to indicate that religion should be has something to say publicly, people will get upset about that. They don't like religion and politics to mix in that way. I guess we'll see. I think probably for some of our listeners, it won't be contentious. It'll be refreshing. For some of our listeners, it will be contentious. It'll be a challenge, and they will feel at times that we've stepped over the line, which I'm sure they felt like that before listening to us, so that's okay.
It seems like these two topics, religion and politics, we're just doomed. If you're in mixed company, if you're having the family or friends over for Thanksgiving, or if you're at the summer family barbecue and you decide to bring up politics or put that in the context of religion, you're just doomed.
Yeah.
Just to failure, so that your wife says to, I'll use my own example, why in the world did you ever bring that up?
Right.
Is there a way to talk about religion and politics in mixed company without engendering or risking conflict?
I come to bring a sword, Jesus says. Politics, I guess so. I don't know. I guess you can talk about politics in a way where people can listen to each other. I've heard mythical tales that's happened before. When you talk about Jesus, though, whether it's talking about Jesus's claims on our economic system, whether it's my personal wallet, or whether it's the way our governments or our big businesses or our small businesses use and spend money, if you talk about Jesus's claims over culture, which story is the true story? Do movies and novels and TV shows that reflect the biblical story of creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, are those more true than TV shows and movies that claim that there is no such thing as the fall, or maybe even worse, there's no such thing as redemption? Those are challenging. Also challenging is when Jesus claims to have authority over all nations. And that means that conversations about Christianity and politics, as long as Jesus is making radical, all-encompassing, universal claims, people are going to get upset about that. I'm going to get upset about that. I don't always like that Jesus feels like he has the right to run me, but he does, and he says he does, and me being upset with it's a part of the game. So I don't think that there's any way there's not going to be some sort of contention or conflict or bad feelings.
The Apostle Paul writes in his letter to the Philippians, I think it's in the 3rd chapter, quote, "But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ." Citizenship and heaven are two things that I don't necessarily or usually put together. When I think of citizenship, I think of
Right.
What country are you from?
Yeah.
So how do we put citizenship in the context of heaven?
Yeah. So, first of all, heaven isn't, for Paul and the rest of the biblical writers, heaven isn't primarily this place that's out there in the sky. Like, you don't belong here. This world's not your home. You're just a passing through. You really belong up there in the sky. That's not what Paul is saying. Heaven is the place where Jesus rules over all things here on earth. So when he says your citizenship is in heaven, he doesn't mean, you don't belong here. He means that there's actually a different ruler than the one ruler that we have here. There's a different ruler besides Caesar. That's Jesus. There's a different economy besides the Roman economy. There's a different power structure besides the Roman power structure. So that's the first thing, is he doesn't mean that it's up there. Whatever is going on, it's something that's happening right here and has payout for right now. The second thing is, Paul is writing the letter to the Philippians, and he's arguing. Well, he's doing a bunch of different things in Philippians, but one of the things he's doing is he's arguing that his imprisonment by Caesar, and Paul at the time is a prisoner of Caesar's. We're not really sure where he's at, what city he's in, but he's a prisoner of Caesar's, and he's arguing that that's okay, that does not mark failure, and he's challenging. See, the citizens of Philippi. Philippi was a Roman colony. It was a city that was populated intentionally by Caesar with retired soldiers. And although the city was in Greece, it was within the bounds of the Roman Empire. It was given a special privilege, which was the retired soldiers that he put into Philippi, that he allowed to settle there. He made them Roman citizens of the city of Rome, even though, they're on the other side of the Mediterranean. Well, that's a point of pride for these soldiers who fought for Caesar and fought for Rome and fought for the empire, to now be declared, you are citizens. See, not everybody in the Roman Empire was a citizen. In fact, it was much more common to be not a citizen. And Paul is telling them, do not find your identity in your citizenship as Romans. Find your identity in Jesus Christ. That's what he's saying. And, prior to this, he says, I too had things to be proud about. I was a Hebrew, circumcised the eighth day, etc., Pharisee of the Pharisees. But I've learned to count all of those things as rubbish, that I may know Jesus and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering. Don't find your identity in your political system. So that's kind of rambling around a bit there. I mean, all of it was important, what I said, but it was all leading up to this point, which is this. For our American listeners, your primary citizenship is not as an American. It is as a member of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And so there's this is challenging for Americans, because Americans have a certain myth, which not all Americans believe in, but many Americans have, which is that America is a uniquely Christian nation. It was established has a special relationship with God. And that's dangerous because it's not true. America is not a uniquely Christian nation. It's not especially committed to Christianity. It's especially committed to the doctrines and ideas of the Enlightenment. It's also dangerous because it pulls our allegiance as Christians. For those of you who are listening who are Christians and Americans, the temptation is for it to pull your allegiance away from the one true God and spread it out over other things that are not Jesus. Could be a political party, could be an economic system like capitalism or something, libertarianism, and to pretend like those things are somehow Christian. And Paul is calling us back from that, saying, no, you are not primarily an American. We are. I am, and you are. Some of our listeners are. We're not primarily Americans. That's not our identity. We are in Jesus. And there's a certain way you've got to sit loose to your citizenship in your country that you never have to in your citizenship in the kingdom of God. And that's his point.
And I understand that, and that makes sense. The tension comes if I have prioritized my citizenship in heaven, because that's my eternal citizenship. I identify clearly and patriotically with my citizenship as an American. And for some of the things that you just enumerated, those things can be in conflict. So there are things going on in our government, in our national government, in our state government that I find that trouble me on my level of Christian citizenship. And that becomes a problem. Then we have to wrestle with that. Now we're back to the original question: what should Christians' attitudes about their country be?
Right, yeah.
So what I've heard you say is don't put your national citizenship ahead or in priority ahead of your heavenly citizenship.
Or to confuse it with it, yeah.
But you don't have to give up your national identity
Right.
as a citizen.
Yeah.
So what do you do when those two things begin to be in conflict?
Well, so I mean, the first thing to do is to realize that your country citizenship, my citizenship as an American citizen, is a vocation that God has called me to. And because it's a vocation that God has called me to, I'm allowed to enjoy it, but to also say, God, this comes from you. And so whatever I think about it is going to have to be oriented towards what you think about it. It's not my identity, it's my vocation. So, Paul talks about it in the Areopagus sermon. He preaches a sermon in Acts 17, and he talks about national citizenship. And he says that God made from one man every nation of mankind. So God made every nation to live on all the face of the earth. They all come from God, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. So God gave them periods of time. Each nation has a period of time that God has given to us, and a geographical area, a boundary, boundaries of their dwelling place, that the people who live there, he says, should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. So God gives us our unique countries that we all live in as ways, venues, arenas in which to pursue him, to have a relationship with him. And so that's different for everybody. It's my citizenship in my country or in my state or in my town is different than my relationship with God in the context of my being American or living in the state I do or the town I do is different than people who are Christians on the other side of the world. But it's given by God as the way, as a means in which to find him and seek him in that unique particular place. So that's a way that I can live here and enjoy being here, but realize it's actually a gift of God. It's not a given. I mean, so G.K. Chesterton has a good line where he says, loving your country, being a patriot, is very similar to loving your mother. God gave you that particular mother. And he gave you that particular mother as a relationship in which to know about him, to love and serve him, to love and serve her, to be loved and served by her. There's nothing wrong at all with me saying my mom is the best mom in the world, as long as I don't actually think that your mom is like a worse mom than my mom. You know what I'm saying? And that's so I love my mom. I think she's great. I think she's the best. For me, she's the best mom in the world. I don't confuse that with God. I don't confuse that. That's not my ultimate identity. God gave you your mom, and that's what he wanted you to have. And that's the way we should think about our country, the countries that we're in, is that they're places that God has given us. Another good example I'll throw your way is 586 BC. The Jewish people are taken away from, many of them are taken away from Jerusalem to be exiles in Babylon. And, Babylon's a pagan nation. It's a completely different mindset and worldview than the country that they were coming from that had been destroyed. But God, through Jeremiah, tells them, take care of that country, like value that country. I'm putting you there. Invest in that country. He says in Jeremiah 29, God says, Jeremiah writes this letter to the exiles in Babylon. And God says to them in Jeremiah's letter, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. I think that's a great prayer for Christians, whether, American Christians or Christians, wherever country you're in, is to pray. Pray for the city that you're in. Pray for the country that you're in. Pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in the welfare of your country, you will find your welfare. And that's completely different than thinking my country right or wrong. And so to use all the principles I've been talking about to answer your question leading into this, Chuck, how should a Christian feel about what about when things go wrong in a Christian's country? Well, I think it's entirely appropriate to say it's wrong. This is wrong, and here's why it's wrong. It's wrong because it's not in accordance with God's will. It's entirely appropriate to say that to your mom. It's entirely appropriate for my mom to say it to me. If I'm doing something that's wrong, for her to come and say to me, Aaron, this is wrong. And the reason why she would say it's wrong is because her primary loyalty is not to me, it's to the God who I'm disobeying. And so as Christians, our primary loyalty is to Jesus and his kingdom. And because of that, Jesus and his kingdom sit in judgment on America. And so we use Jesus and his kingdom to judge America and its rules and its culture. And it's entirely appropriate for us to say this is wrong. Now, I would just hasten to add, we should, again, don't be confused. Don't say, well, I do that. Yeah, because I vote for the one political party that is the Christian party, that's completely aligned with God and his value. No. Jesus sits in judgment on each of our political parties as well. And so as Christians, we need to be able to say, okay, I vote for this party, or I vote for this party a lot of the time, not all the time maybe, but here's what this party that I belong to, here's where they differ from God's will, and I agree with God over against them. So again, citizenship in heaven first, but that should allow our citizenship in whatever country we're in to flourish.
There is an account in the book of Acts, chapter 22, verses 25 to 29. Not going to read the whole thing. Lest we think that heavenly citizenship is all important, Paul came to appreciate his Roman citizenship. Paul was about to suffer a flogging at the hands of a Roman tribune when the tribune received a report that Paul was a Roman citizen. Verse 27. So the tribune came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And he, Paul, said, "Yes." The tribune then relented. So it seems that on that particular day, Paul was saved by his Roman citizenship, not his heavenly citizenship. How do you see it?
I don't think Paul. Well, yeah, I don't think Paul would use the word saved. I know you're not. He wouldn't. He wouldn't. How
about
use
spared?
Spared, yeah, that's good. I mean, so here's for Paul. Here's the deal. So you have, and I'm making completely useless hand motions, which none of the listeners can see right now. So you have your citizenship in the kingdom of God is numero uno. It is your identity. Your identity, Paul would say, my identity is not as a Roman citizen. Am I a Roman citizen? Yes. Is it my identity? Is it who I am? No. He could have easily been born centuries later and been a Byzantine citizen, So that's in flow. So citizenship, Jesus' kingdom first, Roman citizenship. Paul is not going to use his Roman citizenship to trump his kingdom of God citizenship. It will go the other way around. Now, in the case in the back half of Acts, Paul is wrongly accused of taking Gentiles into the temple. It's a lie. And so he's being falsely accused. The leaders of the temple are trying to get him executed for this lie. Paul is not afraid to use his Roman citizenship as a way to say, hey, there's injustice here going on. Roman centurion, it is your job to preserve justice. I'm here because of a lie. Do your job. And he uses his Roman citizenship for that. It's not wrong for any citizen of any country to say, there's injustice happening. Government, it's your job to stop the injustice. That's what you're here for. Later on in Paul's life, he's going to be on trial, not for a lie, but for the sake of the gospel. He's going to be on trial because he will not back off his assertion, confession that Jesus is Lord and not Caesar. He's going to end up getting executed for that. And when he's executed, he does not say, hey, I'm a Roman citizen, you shouldn't do this. Because to do that, to say, well, I'm a Roman citizen, would be to use his Roman citizenship to trump and override his Christian confession, which he refuses to do. So yeah, to use your American citizenship, for those of you who are Americans, to enjoy the benefits of being an American citizen, entirely appropriate. However, when it begins to override, or if it threatens to override or to become an identity in place of our citizenship in the kingdom of God, then you have to reject it. You have to move away from it.
Martin Luther spoke of two kingdoms, the kingdom of the right and the kingdom of the left. The right-hand kingdom is the church. The left-hand kingdom is the state. That may be a bit of an oversimplification, but for the sake of time, let's approach it from that direction. God exercises his will over the earth in both kingdoms, church and state. So what if I were to say God confines himself to the right-hand kingdom and has no place really in the kingdom of the left or in the kingdom of civil government?
Yeah. So,
and people say that.
Right. That would be, that's not the way the Bible talks about how God rules and reigns. God rules and reigns over all things. And he uses the civil government to do that as well. Romans 13 makes this clear, is that the emperor, in this case a bad emperor, when Paul's writing, is a servant of the Lord. He doesn't know he is, but he's actually working for God, and he bears the sword. In other words, it's his job to flex muscles to keep peace, to prevent violence, to bear the sword, to have the means to defend the polis, the city, the nation, the empire, from people who would do damage to his citizens. It's his job, and when he does that job, he is working for God. You know that the kingdom of the right hand and the left hand has sometimes been used to argue for a separation of church and state that isn't biblical, and it's more enlightenment, which is kind of the where your question was headed there. Actually, Martin Luther he learns the kingdom, the two kingdoms from St. Augustine, who wrote a book called The City of God over 1,000 years before Martin Luther was born. And the city of God, the whole gist of the city of God is this, is that, for 300 years, the Christian church grew and flourished in the Roman Empire. But about 100 years before Augustine, the Roman emperor converts to Christianity, and Christianity becomes safe and legal. And in many ways, because it receives the sanction of the government, and because the Roman Empire identifies as Christian, the church finds itself wed to the Roman government in a way that was maybe healthy in some ways and definitely not healthy in other ways. And the unhealthy part is this. Well, there's several unhealthy parts, but one of them is this, is that when the Roman Empire is overthrown, and Augustine is watching this happen from his home in North Africa, the question is, what happens to the Christian church? And so he writes this book called The City of God, in which he argues that, yes, the Roman government was a good thing. It created peace for us and economic prosperity. But the Christian church is not wed to the Roman government in such a way that it must rise and fall with it. And Luther picks up on this because he's addressing two different groups of people. One is the Roman Catholic Church, which says there's no distinction. The church is the government, and the government is the church. And so popes should have the right to have armies. The church leader should have the right to have armies. The church leader should have the right to put the kings and queens that he wants into positions that he wants. All laws should be adjudicated through the church. And on the other hand, you have the Anabaptists and other extremists who say, no, that's wrong. The civil government is not from God. It's bad. We can dispose of it. We don't have to listen to it all. And Luther actually says, no, you're both wrong, that the Christian church, the power that God exercises in the Christian church is the power of the gospel, the most powerful force in the world, the power of changed hearts and lives through coming in contact with the grace of Jesus Christ. The civil government also has power to use that also comes from God, like the Romans 13 power that Paul talks about. And You can't confuse those two. The civil government can't change hearts, and so it ultimately doesn't have ultimate power. But the Christian church can't wield the sword. It's not its job. But God is definitely the God of both of those. God definitely rules and reigns over his world through both of those. But it's important to keep those distinct, but to maintain both of those as well.
So you have a couple of American citizens talking about the current political topic of the day. One of them identifies more or less as a Christian. The other identifies more or less as a secular individual. And when the Christian uses his Christian worldview or biblical worldview to defend his perspective on the political topic of the day, the door slams shut. That may be a little bit too forceful. The secular person just checks out. If you're going to use the Bible to defend your political persuasion, we're done. Haven't you ever heard of separation of church and state? What do you do in that moment?
That's a massive conversation. And I'll tell you why. It's because it's so ingrained in our culture. It's one of those beliefs that becomes a part of our culture and nobody questions it anymore. But there's really no way I can do this in just a couple of minutes, Chuck. I apologize. I'll try to take a shot at going as fast as I can.
Notes.
Yes. One of the things I would say is, okay, I have a book that I use to get my values and my standards from, call it the Bible. You have a book too. And maybe they would say, I don't have a book. I'm secular. So no. Secularism is a belief system. And you are using your belief system, belief in liberty and equality and fraternity. These are secular beliefs. The belief that human beings are free and nobody should be able to control them. That's a secular value. You're using your secular value, the belief that God is unnecessary, doesn't exist or unnecessary. That's actually a faith commitment. That's a faith commitment, which you are believing to create political policy or political beliefs. I also have a faith system that I use for political beliefs. Don't imagine that when we discuss current issues, that one of us is doing religion and the other is doing politics, and we should stay in our lanes. We are both doing religion and we are both doing politics, because we're both talking about our own personal belief systems, that's religion, and how they impinge on the way civilization should work, that's politics. And you can't separate the two. Now, I can't do that in 2 minutes.
That's a really good short answer, though, I have to say.
It doesn't work, though, because people are so ingrained in I've had, in the church that I'm a pastor of, I've had people leave recently because we taught an issue that they wanted to say, you're not allowed to talk about that because that's politics, when it's actually an issue that affects the lives of American citizens. And they want to say, you can't talk about that. And I try to say, I have to talk about that, because there's no difference in religion and politics. They're both belief systems that have to do with how we act. And if there's some way, it would probably take a series of conversations to try and convince them that, no, we're actually both doing the same thing. We're both doing faith-based public talk here. So yeah, Christians have a right. Secular people have a right too. They have a right to talk about politics as long as they understand that they're doing the same thing that Christians are doing when they talk about politics, which is using their ideology and their worldview to discuss public issues.
What if I were to say something like, well, personally, my Christian faith prevents me from supporting abortion, but I don't have the right to impose my Christian ethics on someone else, so I'm not going to try. What's your response?
Well, so yeah, a couple of things. One is that's more enlightenment than it is Christianity. Like, I believe that something is true, but you know what's more important than my belief about defending those who can't defend themselves? You know what's more important than that? Other people's freedom. That's the enlightenment. Freedom and liberty is the highest value, and your personal beliefs need to be subsumed to that. So I would try to say, okay, let's talk about this. I'm not saying that I'm right and you're wrong. Maybe liberty is more important than defending those who can't defend themselves. But you should know that that it's actually not a given. I know that we've told ourselves the story in America for centuries now that liberty is the most important value. So now we all just kind of believe it without questioning it, but it's time to question it. It's time to ask if there's maybe some things more important than liberty, like justice, like truth. I'm not saying liberty is not important. It's definitely a super high value. But is it the value that trumps all other values? That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is this, is that, well, here's how I would say it. Okay, so you believe that abortion is wrong, but you don't have a right to tell other people that abortion is wrong. What about sexual assault? What if I said to you, I think sexual assault is wrong, but I don't have a right to tell people who go and rape women that they shouldn't do that? You'd say, no, that's obviously not true. I think racism is wrong, but I personally don't think that I have a right to tell racists that they're wrong. Everybody would say, no, that's not true. You should tell racists they're wrong. We need to stand up and fight against sexual assault. And I would say, yes, absolutely, I agree. But how do you decide which of the truths that you believe should be private and you should not tell other people, and which of the truths do you believe you should tell other people? And the answer is, it's completely arbitrary, unless truth is more important than liberty. In which case, well, all we're saying is that the kingdom of Jesus stands over and above our polis, or over and above our citizenship in our states or in our countries. And that's all we're trying to say, I think, here today, is that Jesus comes first. Jesus is the Lord of the universe, not Caesar, not the president, not the governors. Jesus is. And so our ultimate loyalty must be to him first. And then we can enjoy our sub-loyalties to our communities, to our governments, to our families, to our friends, underneath that, and embrace those and use those, but as vocations, not as identities.
I think you used the word polis twice. What does polis mean?
So like the city, like government, civilization.
Is that
the way
Greek or something?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's Greek for the word city. It's the word we get politics from.
Okay. So finally, if I have a biblical worldview, and I do, and I derive my moral and ethical perspectives from it, is God disappointed in me if I keep my worldview to myself so as to avoid rocking the boat?
Well, so you shouldn't do that. Your Christian worldview is
I mean,
there.
if I love my neighbor, why would I rock the boat?
Well, anybody who has kids knows that loving your kids involves rocking the boat. There are times when you tell your kid, no, you can't do that. And it's tough and it's hard, but you love the kid enough to say, this is wrong. You can't steal our furniture and sell it and buy heroin with it. You can't do that. It's wrong. It's bad. You might be upset with me. You might say, well, I don't love you. Actually, I do love you. I mean, so Christians, look, what did God save us for? God did not save us to take us up to heaven someday. God saved us to renew us in his image. He saved us so that we can return to the vocation that he called us to in the Garden of Eden, to be his image bearers. And what that means is my Christianity's job is to reflect God to everybody around me, which means
you're not going to have any friends.
No, actually, it's actually gotten me a lot of friends. I know you're joking around, but it's many of my friends are friends because to the extent that I do reflect God, and when I don't, they don't like it. So Christians are called to be salt and light, and we're called to reflect God to the world. It's who we're supposed to be, lovingly, of course, and gently, but it's who we're supposed to be. Just real quick here, is God upset with me if I don't? That's really kind of a loaded question in an entirely different podcast episode, which we've talked about before. Is God angry with me? The answer is no. God has no more anger for you because his son Jesus has died for you. He can no longer he has nothing but love for you. Does he want you to, though? Yes, that's what he's called us to do. He's called us to be citizens of his kingdom so that we can be good citizens of the kingdoms we live in.
Finally, one short question. I don't think you would disagree with me when I say that here in our American culture, it is getting more difficult to hold on to those kinds of Christian values, principles, like thou shalt not kill, which includes unborn children, things like that, or human sexuality, etc. I think the pressure to be quiet is growing. Do you see it that way? And what would you say to somebody who is listening to us right now who is thinking about that challenge that so far that they've put off, but is coming? There's going to be a confrontation at some point with somebody over something, and they're using this program to decide what to do. What would you say?
I don't know if we've given anybody advice on specifics of what to do. I would say this. I would say Satan is not infinitely powerful. He can only attack the lines. Unlike God, who's everywhere, Satan can only attack in one spot at one time. So when he moves to attack in one area, when he's moving to get us to devalue the lives of those who can't defend themselves, the unborn, the elderly, prisoners, those who have mental health issues, he has to move away from a different line. And so whereas the challenges have shifted in America, what it's done is it's created openings elsewhere. And I'll tell you why. I'll be as fast as I can. It is easier for Christians now to not confuse their American citizenship as Christian citizenship, to think that I'm an American and I'm a Christian and those two are the same thing, or I'm a member of this political party and I'm a Christian and those two are the same thing. It's helped us sharpen up, for those of us who are Americans, our views of who God is and how we are to relate to Him, and it's helped us to
contrast.
Yeah, it's helped us to be more critical of our country, our relationships, ourselves, maybe, to say, you know what? Jesus comes first, and I've tried to co-opt Him into my politics and into my economics and into my cultural living, and I can't do that anymore. And so we've maybe challenges in one area, but we've seen relief in other areas too, and that's a gift of God. And it's also comforting that Satan can't attack in all places at once.
Thanks for listening to Craving Answers, Craving God. Here's a text from Carolyn E. in Kansas. Quote, Chuck's podcast is excellent, the best, and Aaron is like no pastor I've heard. They get deep into God's truth and don't mince words. It's amazing, unquote. Thanks, Carolyn, for the encouragement. For Pastor Aaron Miller, our production manager, Larry O'Leary, I'm Chuck Rathia.